Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's collaborative mentoring webinar series. We'll be talking about setting boundaries and expectations. Great group of panelists here. Thank you for joining. If you're just coming in, feel free to use the chat to say hi, introduce yourselves, what your organization is, and where you're tuning in from. We will get started in just a minute as more folks join us. Thank you all for joining. It's always great to see where everyone's coming from, all the different locations across many different time zones. So good morning, good afternoon.
It's always interesting to see like who's the furthest away.
Exactly.
You got to Canada.
Hello, hello. Well, welcome everyone to today's collaborative mentoring webinar series. We'll be talking about setting boundaries and expectations. Thank you for joining us. If you haven't already, feel free to use the chat to say hi and introduce yourselves, what organization and where you're tuning in from. Before we get started, I'm Minnie Chen from Mentor National. We help organize the collaborative mentoring webinar series in partnership with our affiliates and our TA providers. Before we get started, just some housekeeping notes. All attendees have been muted for best sound. Please, we want you to engage, so feel free to type any comments, say hi in the chat. We use the Q&A panel at the bottom of your control panel to ask any questions. We will have a designated Q&A section at the end. If you do need any captioning or live transcription, you can also get that on pressing the CC button at the bottom of the screen. And before we get started, we do want to know who's in the room with us. So type in the chat. And we also have 2 polls. So I will launch the first one. First one is, what is your experience level in the mentoring field? So if you're a beginner, experienced, expert, love to see where you all are at. See the results. So it looks like we have 30% beginners, so those who are new to the mentoring field. We have 64% who are experienced, and 6% of you all are experts. So thank you so much. Our second poll is, what is your role in the mentoring field? So kind of what role best describes how you're connected to the mentoring field. So if you're a mentoring program staff practitioner, if you work at a national or an affiliate organization within mentoring, supporting mentoring programs, if you're a mentor, educator, technical assistance provider, researcher, funder, or other, and feel free to type in the chat if you are other and kind of what your role is. Okay, I will end the poll now and you can see the results. 75% of you all are mentoring program staff practitioners. We have 7% national affiliate organization, 10% mentors, 2% educators, 1% technical assistance providers, and 6% others. So thank you all for being here, and we hope that today's information is applicable to all of you in your roles. And one last thing before we get started is that today's webinar is being recorded, and the recording and the slides will be shared with all of you in a follow-up email in about a week, as well as posted on our collaborative mentoring webinar series website, so you can access all this information afterwards. And I will also put a link in the chat. So I will now turn it over to Monica Mendoza from Mentor Indiana, who will be helping facilitate today's conversation. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. It's really good to see more than 200, 300 of you joining today, and just all of the different places and all of the different great programs that you're bringing to the table. We do recognize that many of you have a good amount of experience in what we're talking about today. So please know that even though we are on the panel and we'll be sort of chatting here, we would love for you to exchange resources and connect to each other in the chat as well, because the more the better, and the rising tide floats all boats. So thank you so much. Today for our agenda, we're going to start off a little bit about just a little bit of a framework behind today's conversation. We'll talk about a couple sample hypothetical kiddos that you may know that may look like kiddos that you're working with every day. And then our awesome panelists who you'll meet here shortly will share some of the ways that they might navigate those conversations and those situations about how to try to prepare mentors for those kiddos in those situations. And then we'll sort of sum everything up in key takeaways in Q&A. Just a really quick expectation setting. I used to be a teacher and I always used to ask my students 2 rules. 1, respect, and 2, engagement. And I already see the chat sort of blowing up with a lot of different posts. So I love that you all are already engaged, but we want to make sure that we're respecting everybody else. So even if you sort of disagree with someone else, either in the chat or on the panel, just trying to navigate, maybe that's a private message to send, or just sort of running that through a filter there. Both myself and Minnie will be taking a look at the chat as well as our panelists, and we'll try our best to sort of keep up there. But just seeing from an asset-based lens, even those people, not just for our mentees, but then everyone who's here at the call today. So respect and engagement throughout. So our conversation today is a little bit about expectations and boundaries. And, you know, a lot of times our volunteers, when they join our programs, they get to see these beautiful commercials that are like unicorns and rainbows and people who have these amazing stories of transformation. And this is the mission and this is the call. And so sometimes our volunteers or mentors join with the expectation of, wow, like I never had a little sister or a little brother. And so this is really going to be just like my family or just like my experience, or I've had all of these amazing grandchildren and I just want to serve some more. And then they find out that the reality is like, they're nothing like my family. Like they're nothing like my experience with children in the past. Even if you're experienced as a teacher or something like that, a lot of times our mentees are just their own brand of unique individuals. You might expect the fun, smiling, bonding that you see in the commercial. And then what you may get is behaviors of distance, of apathy, even something that you consider to be disrespectful, that feels really kind of bad sometimes when you're working with kiddos, especially those who may come from difficult backgrounds. You may expect, looking at the commercials, I have helped them start at point A and I've helped them to achieve amazing success, but then reality shows up and then you feel like, wow, like it kind of feels like they're making what you consider to be a bad decision after bad decision after bad decision. And maybe it doesn't look like the version of success that you would hope for them or that you consider to be successful from your sort of own personal background. And then finally, the number one thing that a lot of volunteers sign up for in mentoring programs is they want to make a difference, right? Like that's why we're in nonprofit. That's why we're in the educational space. That's why we invest our time and love and energy into youth. And so if you don't feel like you're making a difference, you can start to question yourself and say, maybe I just wasn't cut out for this, or maybe I'm not a very good mentor, or maybe, you know, this kid like just maybe that's not possible, right? And we want to underscore, even though it was in the title, there's a reason that the toughest kids was in parentheses or in quotation marks in the title of today's presentation. And so we want to underscore, and I know that Kevin and Audrey will go deeper into this, but there are no bad kids, right? Like no mentor gets a dud, right? But we have to sort of look at what is our own expectation of what we enter into for our programs, or what are the expectations that we set for the mentors who join our programs, and how can we give them the tools to navigate those so that they want to continue staying with the kiddos through ups and downs and building that asset-based background for the kiddos. So without further ado, and before we get into some of our case studies here, I'd love, Kevin, for you to start off by sharing a little bit about yourself. Where do you come from, and what kind of experience you're bringing to today's conversation? And then Audrey will have you go next.
Sure. Thank you, Monica. So my name is Kevin Hillman. I currently reside in Indianapolis, Indiana. I have a wealth of experience that I'm bringing today. So I not only am I a current doctoral candidate, but I have been in the educational space for many years now. I currently work in a higher education setting. I have worked in the nonprofit sector for probably about 7 years. I have also been a mentor and a mentee before. And a whole list of other things that I won't get into. I also have, I'm also serving as faculty at another institution where I teach courses around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And my specialty that kind of sits near and dear to me is workforce development. I love that work, and I feel like it intersects with many, many different areas that probably a lot of our mentees and just even ourselves that we interact with on a regular basis. And so I also bring that experience with me. So thank you.
Yeah, Kevin already getting some love from Barb. Thank you, Barb. Audrey, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, of course. Thanks again. I am Audrey Hood. I also currently live in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I am the mentorship program director with Allies, Inc. And I also am a prevention education curriculum facilitator with the My Life, My Choice program. With Allies, if you don't know about our organization, we specialize in education and trafficking and sexual exploitation, and the mentees that we serve at our organization have a plethora of trauma experiences, from sexual abuse to trafficking and sexual exploitation. And so we do have some trauma training and trafficking experiences that we are bringing to the table from the Allies perspective. And I've been in the nonprofit world for about 7 years. So I don't know that I have the wealth of experience that Kevin brings to the table, but I do have some experience with trauma survivors that I'm excited to just share with you about how to navigate those conversations.
Awesome. And again, we love that you all are engaging in the chat. And so please, we're continuing to look at that, all of us. So share the resources, share your own experiences so that we can sort of work together to learn together. So, so the way that we're going to sort of do this is I'm going to present a hypothetical kiddo to you that you may or may not have felt like you've met in your programs. And then I'd love to hear a little bit from Audrey and Kevin about what are the different kind of training resources, or what are the different kinds of conversations that they would try to arm their mentors with if they're sort of intersecting with this kiddo. So the first hypothetical is Shanna. She has had kind of a rocky road. Her mother, with whom she was very close, died when she was 16 unexpectedly and suddenly. And she ended up sort of with an abusive stepfather that sort of made her want to run away, and she ran away a few times when she was in high school, but she did end up always coming back. She did finish high school, but then after she graduated, she sort of ended up in that opportunity youth category of sort of jumping from job to job, and certainly having a number of different abusive relationships, unfortunately, with some of the men in her life. With one of those abusive relationships, she did end up becoming pregnant unexpectedly, and sort of in the aftermath of having her daughter, she did end up becoming a little bit depressed with her situation, turning to substance usage, having her daughter taken away from her, and then just in general continuing to build that relationship with her. Her mentor has wanted to be there through those ups and downs, but sometimes trying to show up, take her out for coffee, take her out for lunch. Shanna doesn't always show up, right? She'll maybe be in contact with one phone number, and maybe the phone number will change, or she'll set a date to meet for lunch, but then she won't show up. And so, certainly it doesn't feel good to feel like you're setting up a lunch date with this kiddo that you want to be there for, and they're not there. So I know, Audrey, when we were talking about these hypotheticals, one of your first comments out of the gate was, man, I've definitely met this kid. So can you tell us a little bit, if Shanna's mentor called you asking for help, how would you navigate that conversation?
Yeah, and I just want to also just reiterate that, yeah, all of the things that this youth has experienced are tough and maybe outside of even our mentors' normal life experiences. And so it can just be challenging. And so one thing that I love talking about with our mentor team all the time is just worldview. And so before I even jump into some of the things that we already talked about me sharing, this something just came up as you were talking, is just really just bridging the gap and really stepping into their shoes and really trying to understand that you may not have the experiences that they have, and just coaching them on that. And so but we can all empathize with situations. We can draw on feelings and emotions that can help us understand things that they might need, even if you don't know practically what they need. And so when it comes to not knowing what they practically need, because your experiences might look different than the youth that you're mentoring, one of the things that we love to talk about all the time is still show up. Be consistent. We preach consistency all the time, and it can feel so frustrating on the mentor side, because you're like, okay, like, but I'm driving, I'm like using my gas to get there. All of the things, you're like, this is my time. And, we try to say like, well, this is what you signed up for. You already blocked out the time. You had 2 hours blocked. So like, just show up anyways. And maybe you go home a little bit earlier, or take a book with you, or bring your computer so you could just sit and get some work done. Because situations that we have actually seen with our organization and partner organizations that we work with here in Indianapolis is that youth or even adults sometimes are going to test the boundaries and test your limits and what you say to your word, and are you going to hold true? And so they might be literally like, you might be meeting at the park at 2 o'clock, and you show up at 2 or even a little bit before, and they're not there. And they might actually be around the corner, not exactly meeting where you say you're going to meet up, but they're just kind of just hanging out to see, like, is she going to keep her word? Is he going to actually show up again? And maybe they'll do that a couple times to see, like, well, even if I ghost them 5 times, are they still going to show up there for me? Because something that we see is that a lot of the youth that we work with at Allies don't have people show up consistently for them. So you might be the first person that actually shows up even when they don't. And so they might be used to that. And so that's one of the big things that we preach all the time, is just keep showing up. And then it also just can feel tough when a mentee might potentially be frustrated or lash out, or some of those behaviors that come with some complex trauma or generational trauma or poverty or things, again, those things might trigger them. So even if you do get together finally, then they might just, tell you everything that you've done wrong. You're like, well, I thought I was doing the right thing by showing up, right? Like, so not letting their behaviors or their triggers, or the things that cause them to kind of lash out at you, potentially like trigger you in response. And so again, something that we do at Allies is constantly layer our mentors with support. We don't want our mentors to go out there and do this alone. And so whether you're a program director or you're the mentor listening to this today, I would definitely encourage you to make sure you have your own supports. Get in therapy if you need to be in therapy, because walking with children with trauma experiences, or just hard backgrounds and complicated life situations that might differ from yours, again, just can be difficult. And you may not know exactly what to say or how to process it. And it's not always appropriate for you to talk to your friend about it, right? Especially if you're dealing with youth. So we have Allies, we have mentor coaches that go out and walk with the mentors step by step. And we are always saying, like, call your coach, call your coach, call your coach. Or even we even are just starting this month for the first time ever, something I'm super excited about, but an interpersonal processing group for our mentors only, just to come and share what's on their heart and what they're walking through. And so I feel like I could talk all day about this, just kind of just to keep showing up, to really know your own triggers, know yourself, get your self-care in, have your community and your support. And then just realize that the youth that you work with, no matter the background, even if they're an A+ student and on the track team and got a full ride scholarship, doesn't matter who you're working with. Teenagers are going to make decisions that you don't agree with. And so something that we like to talk about a lot as well at Allies is just allowing youth to choose and make decisions for themselves. That's what we call giving them the dignity of risk. And it really is just an opportunity for you to say, you know what, like, I'm not going to tell you what to do, because I'm going to let you choose what you want to do. And I may see that 4 or 5 steps down the path, like, it's going to end bad. It's going to be a negative outcome, and you're not going to like it, and you're going to come back in. And like, the best thing a mentor can do is not respond with, I told you so. Do not do that. Like, that's just like something that we just want to give them the dignity of risk, meaning that they can choose, they can make their choice, even if it's going to be bad, a bad outcome for them, or cause, just maybe destruction in their life, or, whatever you want to call it. But at the end of that, even if it does end up bad, showing up for them and just saying, you know what, like, I'm here for you. Like, let's work it out. Let's look at how we could have maybe done this differently. I'm not necessarily just using it as an opportunity to, like, giving them a teaching moment, but like if the opportunity presents itself, just walk with them, show up for them, show them that unconditional love and consistency. So I know that that's a lot of things that I just said, but that's kind of where I would start with that conversation. But then again, also just like reminding our mentors all the time that, like, they're not alone. And that's like, we don't expect them to know all the answers. They're not professionals in this area. We're all human. And that is like what makes mentoring beautiful, is just like allowing people to be human, make the mistakes, and just be there to support each other.
Love that. Yeah. And we've got some great questions in the Q&A and then also here in the chat. Kevin, is there anything that you would add either on the dignity of risk? And Danny says, well, how far do we let them go? Like, do we just let them try substances? Do we let them do all those things? Like, do we let them endanger themselves? Things like that. So anything that you would add for Shanna's hypothetical case, either related to dignity of risk or anything else here before we move forward?
Yeah, so to go back to Audrey's point and even, the story, the scenario, like being okay with silence. And I know that a lot of us are not okay with that. Like, we're not okay with, I'm not getting any responses. But guess what? That is also probably another way they're testing you to see if you still reach out. Sometimes people want to know, like, how much are you willing to invest before I invest back into you? Like, before this relationship can even start. So, they may be hiding around the corner, or they may look at your text. They get it every time. That doesn't mean they're going to respond, but that doesn't mean that you stop. And so sometimes being okay with silence is a good thing, because a lot can be said when there's not a lot being said. And I think many of us have been in that situation. When it comes to dignity of risk, I think one thing that I took away from that is that you're helping the mentee build agency when they probably don't have that anywhere else in their life. And so that's one thing that mentors need to consider, is that you are someone that's helping this particular young person build agency in themselves. When they build agency, they begin to value themselves more. They see themselves differently. They navigate differently throughout the world, but they have to have an opportunity to be able to build it in the first place. And so I understand all the questions about, like, how far do we go? I think that's subjective. I think that also goes to, like, if it's harmful, like if it's super, super harmful, like, are you mandated to report if it's, a certain age group or things like that? Yes. So we understand the confines of those things that we have to operate within, but you still need to keep in mind that your job is to help build that agency in them, and that you need to keep that at the forefront. You have yours, you need to help someone else get theirs.
Yeah, and I think, just to a lot of the things that I'm seeing in the chat about youth who are either court mandated or are showing apathy or disrespect, again, that's exactly what we're talking about today. And the challenge is how do we flip that to be asset-based, or at least trauma-informed, and sort of understand that there are no maladapted youth. There are just youth adapted to different circumstances. And so if you look at, apathy, is that a survival technique that they have needed in their lives? Because if they do start caring, if they do start engaging, what does that look like in their home environment? And so just trying to flip a lot of those things on their heads and trying to give that tool and that framework. And, if you haven't gotten into Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain, I'm huge into, working that in with mentors and with youth. How can we help everyone to sort of say, okay, it's not a bad kid, it's an adapted behavior that helped them to survive, and how do we shift that into a new framework? So thank you both so much there. And again, for your all's continued engagement in the chat. We will also circle back to some questions at the end if we're not covering them as we go along. So we are watching that. So thank you again for those. We have another hypothetical here. So Marcus is 12 years old. He's shy, but generally he gets pretty good grades in school. He goes all the time. He's a really sort of model kiddo. His mom is a hard worker. She works overtime to try to provide for him and his little brother. And when he comes home from school, his number one thing is to take care of his 3-year-old brother. He actually has done well enough in school that he was offered a scholarship to attend different camps and hopefully long-term go and pursue the college career of his dreams there. But something that his family is talking about is, well, we still kind of need you to stay home and take care of your brother. And so the mentor's gotten a little frustrated. They say that, you know, he shouldn't have to be staying here at home. The home smells like smoke. Is this child abuse to ask him to be in this circumstance and things like that? And so I know, Kevin, when we chatted about Marcus's story, several questions came to your mind. Can you share how you'd guide a mentor through thinking about Marcus's situation here?
Yeah, definitely. So I would first like to echo a point that Audrey made earlier, and that's, making sure that you are going to therapy and dealing with your own issues and triggers. That's number one. And so when I look at this one, I zero in on the house smells like smoke. Everyone has their own personal opinions against whatever recreational, medical, however you want to list that, uses of whatever substances people decide to use. Everyone has their own opinions about that. But you cannot put your expectations on this family that you are, and you're a stranger. You are basically seen like as intruder if there's no relationship, and you're coming in trying to impose your way of life on this family and this particular mentee. That's something you should not do, and you have to check that before you even get to the door. And so if that is the first thought when you walk into the house, that is the only thing you're concerned with before anything else, and it's not relationship building, then you probably should go back and get more training. Because you have to deal with self first. The other thing is you have to understand that there are a lot of socioeconomic, political, whatever systemic factors that contribute to individuals possibly having to, like the mom, having to work overtime, maybe living paycheck to paycheck, trying to build a life out of something that they may not have seen before or had access to or even dreamed that they could participate in. And so you have to have that understanding when you also come into this, like this particular situation, understanding, yes, a scholarship is great. He's a wonderful student. He's got this wonderful opportunity. But maybe his mother is the first person in his family to be able to make the kind of money that she's making, to provide that kind of life for her kids where they have a roof over their head and they can eat, to where he can get good grades in school and be a model kiddo. Like maybe she is the first person to be able to do that in her family. That also needs to be something that we think about, and it can't always be what they're lacking. And so that goes to talk about like our biases that we have. Everyone has bias, like everybody. And it's a natural thing that we develop because stereotyping helps us categorize things that may be dangerous, things that may be advantageous, like, people, places, whatever. We have biases and stereotypes about everything. And so one thing about our implicit bias, those are the things that sometimes we don't necessarily address with ourselves, but that we hold true. It's like our values are like they live in us, but they come out in the things that we say and the things that we do. And so you have to begin to check those things, which means self-awareness. You have to begin to know self. That means doing a lot of self-reflection, understanding what situations have you been in. Audrey mentioned it earlier. Don't let the triggers trigger you. If you know this is a trigger because this might be a background that you came from or you're familiar with and you feel some type of way, then you need to deal with that prior to coming into working maybe with youth that are in that same setting. And this doesn't apply strictly only to like urban youth. This can be applied to rural settings as well. We all have different biases about different people's places and things, and that has to be dealt with. Now, once you start dealing with self and getting that awareness, again, as I mentioned, a lot of the socioeconomic, social, whatever, systemic factors that contribute to maybe a situation of poverty that a family is living in. So we know like there's a such thing as generational poverty, which means it's 2 generations of people that have lived in this particular situation where there's a lack of hopelessness. They don't see a way out. There's lack of access and opportunity to several sets of resources, education and financial being a couple of them. And it impacts the family so much that they really don't see a way out of what they're in, and they can't fathom what that looks like, and then that has been passed down to the next generation, and they have no hope and they don't see any way out. And so we know that has captured and trapped a lot of people in that mindset, and so they're living out the mindset that they're trapped in, which is this generational poverty mindset. And so you have to understand that not everyone has had the same opportunities as you. Not everyone values those opportunities the same way that you do, because education, it may be a big deal, but it may not be such a big deal that it was in your household. And so you also have to keep that in mind when you are approaching this work as a mentor and working with different sets of youth. So if you see here, as I talked about before, when I mentioned those core beliefs and things that we hold, if you look at this graphic we have up here, as you see, it says, these are learned ideas, things that have been instilled in us. They have been attributed to from like religion, history, media, at home, school, and then, those are things we believe. And then, okay, these are how we feel people should operate based off our set of beliefs, which is what the interpretations would be. And then the behaviors are the things that outwardly. So it's the things that you say, it's the remarks, or it's the looks, it's the coded languages you may use with a friend. Like Audrey mentioned, maybe you should not be talking to your friend. Like, it's the coded language you may use with your friend about a particular mentee that you're working with. Those are all the things that you have to begin to wrestle with and work through. On the flip side of that, you also need to understand that you can wrap all this up if you really take a look at being culturally minded. And so I specifically want to look at the points of being culturally humble versus competent. I personally do not like cultural competence because I firmly believe that it tells people, okay, you can learn enough about a group to where you don't need to learn anymore, and that everyone in this group will subscribe to these same factors because they belong to this particular group. That's a big no for me. Like, because everybody is their own person, everyone brings something different. Monica mentioned it earlier. Our kiddos are their own unique of person. And so if you are coming with a cultural competent mindset, you have already not realized that your youth is coming as their own individual person. You've thrown that out the window now. When you are practicing cultural humility, you are taking the approach that you are constantly learning, like you never stop learning, and that there's always something new to be learned about the culture that you're working with. However, there may be some factors that are similar amongst individuals that belong to this particular culture, but that does not mean that all of them will subscribe or adhere to it, or that it applies to every single one of them. It's always evolving. It's always growing, because you should be. It's like a lifelong process. Like individuals that are in school, they're lifelong learners. This is the same way. You're a lifelong learner, except for it's among cultural groups. And so I love to look, one of the resources that is in the packet is that if you look at like healthcare is one of the places. This is a really big deal when we talk about cultural humility versus competence. And so doctors, we need doctors that are not competent and think, okay, I know enough about this particular group of people. I know how to treat all the illnesses that face them. Boom, done. Let's work with everybody. And then they're working and you come across them and you're like, hey, no, just because I belong to this group, none of that applies to me. Could you stop trying to give me all these tests? Could you stop talking to me like that? I need you to treat me in the way that I need to be treated for the problems that I'm facing, not just because I belong to this group. Well, if that doctor was practicing cultural humility, they would understand, okay, these are maybe some of the factors because they belong to this group that they're facing, maybe health factors. These are some of the solutions that we could use if that is what they're coming in to see me about. But you come in with the approach that this is this person. Let me learn about this person, regardless that they belong to this group. Let me learn about this person. And then do they fit in another group that I didn't think they belonged to? Do they fit in the community of patients in general? Because that is a community, that is their own culture. Not everyone is a patient, and so it's like, have you relegated them to a particular culture because you thought something else and you didn't take the approach to be humble enough to continue to learn and to be influenced by who they are so that you could tailor the approach?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And again, the slideshow can be accessed in the link that Minnie just put in the chat, and both the slideshow and the recording today for all of these amazing resources. So everything here is clickable. You can access those articles and these resources if you'd like to continue to delve into cultural humility, cultural competence. Mentor has an amazing Better Mentor toolkit if you haven't checked it out. And one of the entire chapters is on cultural humility. So definitely check those out. And Kevin also provided Health City as well there, sort of for that doctor-patient analogy there. So awesome. Thank you so much. Our last kiddo hypothetical kiddo that we're going to talk about today is Libby. So Libby lives in a very, very rural area of Indiana. I saw a couple notes in the chat about you serving kiddos in rural areas across the country. And certainly there are their own challenges serving kiddos who are far away from urban areas, who may not have access to the same kinds of resources, staffing, everything like that, that an urban area would. she's in a situation where her family, on one hand, does not accept her and her girlfriend being together, but then on the other hand, have encouraged her to go out and, she's still a minor, but have encouraged her to go out and sleep with adult men in order to help pay the bills. So there is certainly an overlap there, Audrey, with some of the work that you do. Because of some of those sexual experiences, she has been placed in juvenile detention, and there's a lot of stuff going on with her family there. So sort of the fallout of all of that, she's gotten fairly depressed. She's been in and out, both from the juvenile facility, but then also from behavioral hospitals for self-harm and suicidality, suicidal behaviors. And then certainly it's not very easy to keep your grades up in the midst of all of this. And so, either of you, clearly this young woman has a lot that she's working through. How do you help her and her mentor figure out what they're supposed to tackle together, and what maybe is best suited for not the mentor? Like, should this be handled by another person, by another organization? So whichever of you, it's open to both Audrey and Kevin, would like to start there.
I think I'm going to echo Audrey and start off and say, like, you should, again, do not impose your personal beliefs on this family. That's number one. You have to check that bias before you walk through the door with this family. Not saying that I agree with the behaviors that are happening, that she's being encouraged or forced into, but you have to check that when you go into this work from the start.
Yes.
Audrey, I know you got this. This is your area. You can
yes.
run with this.
No, that's all of that. Yes. I think that is so important to ensure that you're, again, like going back from the bias to the worldview, all of that, what your beliefs, what you're coming in, your upbringing, what you find important, what you value. It's really important for you to know those things about yourself, so you don't project those things. And it's one thing about mentoring to outcomes, right? Like, you might have goals that you're working on. Your program might have specific things that they want you to accomplish, but sometimes you just have to stop and just meet the kids where they're at, and kind of just take it one step at a time. And one of the things that we talk about a lot, again, with our organization, is we do have so many complex things happening within the children's lives that we're working with. We work ages 12 to 24. So we get all kinds of varying things that are happening in their life. And I think school can be a huge one, that we have like ideas of what success in school looks like. And again, that's not necessarily what our mentors are specifically mentoring towards. But again, I think kind of where I'm going with that is we want our mentors to just be healthy, positive influences in their life. And so we aren't necessarily trying to change things about their life or change things about their family. And so what we just say is, like, stay in your lane all the time. Mentor should be a mentor. A therapist should be a therapist. A case manager should be a case manager. And again, I know that there are all kinds of different programs represented on the call today, but that is how we approach it. And we want our mentors to kind of stick to that outcome. And then our program has things that we're specifically working on with them. But when it comes to these different areas, again, we don't ask our mentees about their past experiences or their trauma, or like, we don't want to re-traumatize them with our mentoring. And so we really try to keep it future or present focused, because sometimes it's survival mode and sometimes they're not thinking about tomorrow or 5 years. So asking about a 5-year plan might not really be super effective with one of these youth that we're working with. And I just think it's really important to again, like Kevin and I both have said multiple times, like, not projecting your values, your beliefs onto this family. But then another thing that we find happens a lot is when a mentee does show up with their mentor and they've had a bad day or they're upset with their family, right? And they just start going off about their family. The mentor's best next move is just to listen and not necessarily respond and be like, yeah, I don't think your mom, whatever, either, right? Or start like agreeing with them, because that's not building trust. Where you think that bonding with them on what they don't like is going to build trust, they may see that as just like you don't know what you're talking about. You never even met my mom. So like, I can talk bad about my mom, but you can't talk bad about my mom. And now I don't trust you. And what if you're talking bad about me to our mentor coach or whatever, right? So kind of just domino effects. And so I would just say, listen and have a great listening ear, and then know how to redirect them, especially if they are a youth that is engaging in counseling or therapy. You know, figure out, talk to somebody in your program about what does that look like to redirect, by saying, you know, like, have you talked to your therapist about this? Or is that something you're addressing with your counselor in family therapy? That sounds like it's a great topic for them, you know, and then kind of redirecting, and then just being able to focus on maybe the fun things that you're working on. Again, not like ignoring them. Like if they need to talk it out, like let them talk it out. But if you are not a therapist, a licensed therapist, or in your mentoring role, if that's not your role, like you can do more harm than good by trying to offer things, because you may not know what they are working on in therapy, those grounding things. But again, going back to be in therapy yourself, know how to regulate your own emotions, because you are the one that is in the position of co-regulating them as well. So when it comes to, reporting, I know that is a huge thing. So and I know there were some questions in the chat also earlier that we didn't really get to, about kind of like how far do you go. Obviously in the state of Indiana, all adults are mandated reporters. So if you know that they're harming themselves, they're being harmed, or they're planning on hurting somebody else, like you have to report that. But a good like rule of thumb that we kind of follow at our organization is that like we don't report without them knowing. So we always make sure that they know, because again, we want to give them control, and we want them to be like in the driver's seat of their own life. And we're not just trying to tell them how to live their life, but but then we try to reiterate, like, this is for your safety because we care about you. So, you know, I'm all over the place, but yeah, I would definitely just like keep the mentoring role, like keep as a mentor, be a mentor, not a therapist, not a case manager. And then as an organization, if you're the program director or the person running the program, or if you're even the mentor, I would definitely encourage you to get the program access to other resources, partner with other organizations. Don't try to do everything yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like we are all better together. And so let people that are doing case management, or if it's a special needs youth or a victim of trafficking or whatever it looks like, right? Like get the specialized care that they need, rather than just trying to like have fun and just ignore all the things, right? Like we still need to address the needs of the youth. So.
Absolutely. That web of support and that network, especially so many of our kiddos don't have that ready-made network built out for them. And so it's really not about being the end all be all for the kiddo. It's about saying, okay, how can we brainstorm about how we can reach out? And, you know, something that was very dispiriting to me is I visited a youth program in the last few years, and they said, well, I'm curious, you know, it being a rural area, what are some of the different ideas or supports for BIPOC youth or for LGBTQ plus youth who may want to connect to others like them that they may not see in their immediate surroundings? And the answer was, they don't really need that. Like, do they want that? That's not a thing. Is that something, Kevin, you know, as far as connecting to others and making sure to have those networks? I've seen a couple notes in the chat here about connecting to organizations that can provide those networks. You know, it doesn't all have to be through a one-on-one therapist. It's how do we connect them to support networks that will help them to feel less alone?
Yeah, and I can definitely speak to that in my years in the nonprofit sector. You know, I will say, to Audrey's point, I made that blunder in the beginning, you know, working in the nonprofit sector, being a case manager, where you think you're supposed to have all the answers, because you don't always get trained to know that you don't have to have all the answers, even though they're right in front of you. And so I made that blunder, you know, of trying to do that, and realized quickly I should not be doing that. And so, you know, through that, I learned the importance of partnership engagement, and things like that. And so specifically around that, you know, Monica and Audrey both already spoke to it, and I echo their point. It is, you are not the answer to everything, and that it is okay to ask for help. You should ask for help. Because honestly, as Audrey mentioned, you may not be equipped to handle this. And guess what? That's okay. It's okay. They may need to be with another mentor that's better suited for them. And it's okay to have to talk through that with whoever your coach is or the program director, and say, okay, is there a process for transition? I don't think I can handle this. Or, you know, what resources can I tap into? And for those that are managing the organization, you know, have you Have you made it so that partnerships is important? Do you have someone that is dedicated to building and sustaining and maintaining those partnerships for your organization so that when you need to reach out, you're not frantically searching, that you already have a network of people that you can pull on, that you can call over there and maybe ask for Lynn. And I'm just using that as an example. You can ask for Lynn because you know Lynn is going to be there and she's going to help you get what you need to be able to serve the mentee or the youth that you're serving, or just help your organization in general with whatever the need may be. And so you need to be intentional with doing that. Now, on the other end, putting on my DEI hat, you should always make sure that there are some type of connections and community for the youth that you're serving. In general, as people, I know we preach individualism so much, especially here in our country, but nobody gets anywhere by themselves. Everyone needs someone and everyone needs to belong to a community, whether you want to admit it or not. Everyone wants to belong somewhere. And so if you are engaging in this work and you're training mentors, or if you're a mentor yourself, you need to understand that community is important and you are not the community. It's the people around you that help make your community. And then you need to help your mentee or youth find their own community. So again, that goes back to partnerships and making sure that maybe the due diligence is there. So for example, LGBTQ plus organizations, not all of them are created equal. Not all of them do just in their serving of youth that belong to that community and that population. Like some of them are very harmful and we don't know it, but they are doing a lot of harm to our youth that we're serving. And so sometimes it's doing the due diligence to find out if this, if this connection is worth it. Not all connections and partnerships are worth it. And that's the other thing that you have to keep in mind is just because they say they serve who you're serving does not mean they're worth getting in partnership with, because they may not have the same vision as you. They may not have shared outcomes, goals, or even desire to really make the change and impact that you or your organization desires to do. And so if you are really, really wanting to do this work and be invested, then you also have to be invested with your partnerships and understanding community and helping build community for those that you serve.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you, Audrey, for answering questions there in the chat. Please check it out if you haven't opened up the chat yet. I do also want to call attention to the continuum of exploitation that you shared with us when we were preparing for this. Audrey, could you tell us a little bit more about this resource?
Yeah, this is put out by GEMS, which is the Girls Education and Mentoring Services out of New York. And I always like to share this when we're talking about trafficking specifically and working with survivors of trafficking, because if you look at, the kind of the continuum, looking at like by time that they are exploited, things that have happened in their life. And I'm not going to go through all of the pieces. You can kind of read on the slide: guilt and shame, low self-esteem, runaway, maybe they have poverty, and maybe they've been sexually abused as a child. By the time they're approached by a trafficker or a pimp, it's kind of like not that far off. You're like, okay, I kind of get why they chose that. All other things considered, that probably seemed like the better choice. And so again, I just like talking about this when we're talking about survivors, working with survivors of trafficking specifically, just because again, it helps you kind of get into their mindset of why they chose what they might have chose, not because they made the decision to be trafficked. Like that's not what they chose, but they chose survival, and that was the best option probably for them at that time. And so again, and when you're working with youth that have complex trauma or other specific varied experiences that make working with them maybe difficult, maybe it's the distance of relationship, maybe they're not excited, or they're court ordered. I know again there was people in the chat talking about like those different barriers that kind of make them not excited for the relationship. And again, like most youth aren't just excited to go talk to a stranger. Like that's not like you signed up for that because you want to like change their life, but they're kind of like in this situation because of their life experiences. So again, keeping that in mind, that these are the life experiences that they've had. And so like, again, it might not be all rainbows and butterflies, but I think like approaching them consistently, showing up, understanding that you don't have all the answers, and asking for support and getting the support that you need so you can again model the way for them, is going to go way further. And again, eventually we have seen it time and time again when we start working with youth that are in locked residential facilities, that's where they start. And so of course they're excited to talk to their mentor because they get to go off campus, or they get a phone call where they may not have anybody coming to visit them, or they may not have anybody to call at night when everyone else is, calling people. And so they're excited, but then as soon as they leave, it's like, you don't exist. And that is really hard for mentors. As it should be, right? It's not wrong that that's hard for us. That's like a relationship that you've invested in, but they just don't have that same maybe intentionality or care back for you. And I think it's just important to also just to kind of like understand what mentors are motivated by. So like when you are signing up to become a mentor, if you're a mentor yourself or you're a program director, again, looking for mentors in your community, like what are they motivated by? And if they are looking for a friend themselves, like this might not be the work for them, because that's not like what's going to, like if they need somebody that will call them at 7:00 on a Tuesday night, like that is probably not going to happen. They might get stood up more than they, are received. So I think just like understanding, and again, I think that ties back into the expectations and the boundaries that we set. And so all of that to say, this continuum, like, and you can kind of put anything in there, maybe the end isn't commercial sexual exploitation of children, maybe it's something else. But just considering their history, considering their background to get them to where they are today, it may not be that far of a leap that you picture it to be.
Absolutely. And then, so, even just thinking about how we layer in these different levels of intentionality into our programming, right? Like if there's a recruitment process, if there's a training process, if there's an interview process, if there's like a matching process, right? What are all of those different touch points that you can build into your program to try to get at what those mentor motivations are? And if it's a one-to-one program, how you might be able to say, oh, this might be either not the program for you, or we need to make sure that we intentionally don't pair you with a kiddo that we know may not be able to meet you on some of those levels too. So sometimes it's not that like you can't train people or you can't give them equip them to be better or to continue to learn, but sometimes it's also how intentional can we be up front so that it's a little bit less of a heavy lift moving forward. So looking at how can we build that into our program as well. I feel like, Audrey, you also just looked at like a mentor satisfaction or like pairing thing as well, kind of related to that. No, am I? No, okay, I'm making that up. That's okay. I make things up sometimes. It's all good.
Sure.
Well, so, big takeaways so far from what I'm hearing, and we will jump into questions here shortly, is, cultivating that self-awareness and that cultural humility for yourself. So starting with yourself first when you're intersecting with these kiddos, because there's no way that you can bring calm to a situation if you're not yourself calm, right? Like if we're dysregulated, there's no way that we're going to help a kiddo help to regulate their lives and make the right decision, right? Understanding that you're not alone, connect with other resources, connect with other mentors. I feel so rejuvenated by all of these amazing, amazing people in the chat who are saying like, hey, let's connect around this resource. This is what we do in our program. You all are answering each other's questions, which is phenomenal. So just continue to understand that you're not the only one out there, and that we can continue to network and try to find those answers together.
Hey, Monica, real quick,
Yeah.
For the first one, when you talked about cultivating self-awareness and cultural humility, one of the things that a lot of people don't do, even though they are becoming self-aware, what is the intention behind you wanting to be a mentor? If you are coming with this saviorism perspective, you do not need to be a mentor, at least not yet, until you work through that. And so sometimes people don't address that, even though they address their biases, they don't address their intention behind it. And so if that is the intention that's coming, there's probably a lot more work that needs to be done, because you should not come in thinking you're going to save anyone.
Absolutely. In my previous mentoring program, I was the mentor trainer who kind of caught them after they came in through the interview process and before they got matched. Like, I always joke that like I was there to shatter their illusions and to be like, it's not like the commercials. You can't do that here, things like that. And so just really trying to build that in. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kevin, to fight against that saviorism. Setting and maintaining boundaries for the long haul. Henry Cloud has a lot of really phenomenal books about understanding boundaries, both for yourself and your relationships, but then also for young people as well. Help show them that boundaries are not evil, right? By modeling it yourself. And as we consistently come back to sticking around and sharing power. And the biggest takeaway there, you are not responsible for your mentee's life, right? Anything else, Audrey and Kevin, that sort of resonates with you or that you would want to add to from this slide?
I think too, I think Annie may have just said it in the chat just about not being a mentor because it looks good on your resume.
Yes.
And I'm like, yes, like, amen. But also just, I think one of the big things is again, going back to the intentions and looking at what the program is going to set you up for as well. So the program is serving the mentor as much as they're serving the mentee. So again, my role, I'm the director at Allies, the mentorship program director. So I'm always kind of thinking like, how can we serve mentors better so they do want to stick around? So it's really creating that culture and that environment for your mentors as well. And so knowing what motivates them, but also like really setting that expectation with them up front as well, that, you know, you might be signing what we call a friendship pact, like for 1 year, like, oh, we'll be friends for 1 year. But like, what we really want is that year, that within that year that you're being coached and supported, and like you learn kind of all the tools of the trade, and like how you can be redirected and who you can reach out to, that after that year, you're just now friends. And so you don't need the program to kind of fall back on. Now you're just friends and doing normal friendship things, you know, like doing holiday things together and crafts and going to the park and like, you know, whatever that looks like. So I think setting them up for success in that way too. And as a mentor, really knowing like, am I going to be a mentor? And then like, when I get to my year, like date, am I going to be like ready to like bounce? Because just knowing that like, the youth might be ready to, you know, be done with the relationship, but like as the mentor, and again, I know things happen, you move, like life changes, like things happen, but just being like realizing when you're walking into a mentoring role, like really mentoring is for the long haul. So that's what I like to, you know, say. Obviously every program might look different, but I like to stick around in people's life as long as I can. I always like to say like, you can't get rid of me. So yeah, so just something that I wanted to add in there as well.
Yeah, and the last thing I would love to add is that doing this work, I believe you really do have to have some type of knowledge around intersectionality. And intersectionality it doesn't pertain strictly to just identities. I know sometimes we talk about, oh, okay, I may be woman and Black and LGBTQ+. Yes, it is your intersecting identities. But one of the things that always gets left out is the idea of power. And it's been brought up multiple times, is that there are different ways that power comes to play with the different identities that many of us and our youth hold. And so think about it, if, you know, especially Libby, I believe was the name of the last scenario we looked at, you know, being female or woman and LGBTQ+, you know what I'm saying? And then like all these other things with her identity that are there. But what we fail to sometimes talk about is the way that power plays out in those identities, and how she may have power over here but not over here, and she doesn't know why, like the connection isn't made. And you know, as a mentor, when you coming in, you have to be able to understand how power comes into play. It comes into play in not just, you know, the behaviors that you put in, but the way society has structured our interactions with youth. And so, you know, we teach youth that they don't bring a whole lot because they don't know a whole lot, and that we're giving you the things you need to learn. That is a form of an abuse of power, because youth do know, they are knowledgeable. They're not blank slates. They're not dumb. They don't come with nothing. They come with lots of things, and that we need to recognize that, leverage that in the relationship, so that we can make sure we're doing our due diligence with our relationship with our youth. And so, you know, one person I love to talk about is a wonderful resource, Kimberly Crenshaw, is the one that started talking about intersectionality in the first place. And I believe you always go back to the person that talks about it, because over time, their ideas develop more, they get a better understanding, and her understanding in things has grown over the years. And so if you have not listened to any of her work or read it, I suggest that you do, because the way she talks about intersectionality highlights power, and that's going to be very important.
Love that. And that sort of leads into this final resource before we jump into questions and takeaways. Youth Collaboratory out of Pennsylvania has this phenomenal pre-match training that has multiple modules that are all available for you to just go and access and take away. But one of the things that they talk about is positive youth development. And so this idea of really focusing in on what are the assets that the kiddo is already bringing to the table? How can we highlight those? So for example, if you're into CTE or career stuff, like mynextmove.org is amazing as far as breaking down future jobs into soft skills and hard skills, and how can you shout that out even at a very young age. But how can we call out all the amazing resilience factors? Because if you look at these 3 hypothetical kiddos, what are the positive things that we can call out that they are doing and that they are equipped with from their amazing backgrounds that have given them opportunities to build that resilience and those skills. So positive youth development, certainly looking at developing those 5 C's and then finding opportunities for them to utilize and to strengthen their voice. And certainly, again, the Better Mentor Toolkit does have a lot as far as uplifting youth, uplifting their voice, and trying to plug them into communities and resources and things like that. So I know that we're coming to the end of this hour. I know that our original intention was to have the bulk of this conversation, planned conversation, happen for the first hour. We will stick around to answer questions. So I know that we have several in the chat, Minnie has been collecting, several in our Q&A. But I also know, Minnie, that you have a survey that you want to sort of make sure that everyone knows about. And then we'll just sort of launch into an informal conversation. But I'm just, part of the reason why I asked Audrey and Kevin to be here today is that, thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. Thank you so much for sharing those resources with us. I'm a big believer in practitioners talking to practitioners and then bringing some of the research alongside. So also thank you all for engaging in the chat as well. It has been a wonderful conversation so far today. We look forward to continuing it in the questions and answers portion, but I wanted to make sure to give space, Minnie, if you had anything that you wanted to address, if anyone had to hop off at the hour.
Thank you so much, Monica, Audrey, and Kevin. And like Monica said, we'll be transitioning to a Q&A now, but definitely please help us by filling out the survey that will pop up after you exit. Really appreciate any feedback that you will have, and so that we can continue improving and hosting these webinars. So if you have to hop off, thank you for joining us. And please definitely stay in touch on the Collaborative Mentoring Webinar Series website, which we will have everything posted there, as well as a follow-up email will go out next week. And now I'll turn it back to the Q&A. Monica, do you want me to read out some of the questions we have?
I can read some of the ones from the Q&A portion. If you don't mind sharing some of the ones from the chat, we can just sort of go back and forth.
Okay, great. Go ahead.
Awesome. So Kevin and Audrey, one of the questions is a pretty straightforward one, another hypothetical kiddo. How do you deal, especially after COVID, with an online mentor session where the kids get too shy to turn on their camera? So it's just kind of like you're staring at a name and you don't know what's going on the other end. How might either of you navigate that?
So I had this very, very issue when I was teaching during COVID. And I had some students that did not want to turn on their camera. To be honest, I didn't care. If you were interacting and talking with me and I was getting responses from you, you were engaged. Why force you to do something if I'm actually getting responses and engagement out of you? I don't have to look at your face to hear what you're saying. Now, yes, we know that nonverbal body language speaks so much, and it would help so much more if we could see what you look like while we're talking. But there's plenty of times you talk to people over the phone and you don't see them. So why do you feel the need to make them have to turn on their camera? I'm going to flip the question back on you. That's something that you probably need to ask yourself. Do you need that? Or is it because you've been conditioned to think that's what you have to have?
I'm a very, I resound with nonverbals quite a bit. So it definitely is an adjustment, but it's good to be self-aware in that case for sure. I understand the importance of humility and checking judgment and bias, but the role of the mentor is also to provide advice sometimes. How do you suggest we give advice while also checking judgment? Audrey, any initial thoughts there?
Okay, so the question is, how do we give advice but also not judge, right? Am I understanding the question
Yeah.
correctly? Okay, that's a tough one because I think it comes down to, in my opinion, this is strictly my opinion, I think it comes down to what are you giving advice on, and why are you saying what you're saying? And so, it'd be helpful maybe to have a specific scenario that we could chat through on a specific type of advice, because nothing is coming to my head on off the top of my mind. But I think just checking your intentions of why you're saying what you're saying, and again, is what you're saying a reflection of your values, your beliefs, or is it something that's genuinely helpful? And is it meeting them where they're at? Are you able, when you're asking questions or when you're giving advice, can you ask questions instead? Kevin's giving me the yes. I think I love asking questions more than just filling space with talking. And so I think asking them questions, what do they think? What would they do? How would they navigate the situation? I think is always really great. And it kind of saves you also from saying something that they might not like. Because more than likely that's what's going to be.
I love that. Jesse in the chat says, I like to ask them if they're interested in receiving my advice because consent is key.
Yeah.
I saw a lot of lively body language. Speaking of body language, Kevin, anything to add there?
Oh, sorry, I was muted. I echo everything Audrey said. Nothing different. I think questions are really big. And I just say, from my experience working in social services as a case manager, I would always ask them, well, do you want advice or did you just want to talk about whatever it was? And then again, I ask further questions. Well, do you want advice specifically on this or like the whole thing that you're talking about? Because sometimes they just want to know, no, I just want your advice on this particular area. And guess what? That's okay. And it's also okay to go, hey, these are some couple options that I see out of what you said that could be potential things you might want to consider. I always say options and consider, so that way I'm not telling you this is what you need to do, but here are a couple options from my opinion or from my observation. You could choose to do them or not, but here they are, and this is what they could potentially lead to if you decide to go this route. And then again, that's the agency part. I say what I need to say, and I sit back and let you make the decision.
Yeah, I think just, again, echoing that as well, I think giving them the dignity to choose, letting them know their choices, like the role of a mentor, I think even more than just like giving advice as a mentor, the role is really to expand possibilities, show them their options, let them know, because again, the youth that I work with specifically in our programming and a lot of the youth that you're probably all working with, like they may not have ever known that there were choices, and that's what led them to some of the life experiences that they've had, which is not their fault, right? And so just like helping them see that there might be another way. It just might take a little bit more pre-planning and navigating together, but letting them lead and showing them what those possibilities are. It's great.
Awesome, thank you. Susanna, I see a couple of your questions, and I do know that if you haven't yet explored the National Mentoring Resource Center, Minnie, if you don't mind maybe dropping the Refugee Mentoring Toolkit and then maybe the Starting a New Mentoring Program Toolkit there. If not, I can find it as well. I'm just scared about sharing my screen, but there are amazing resources through the National Mentoring Resource Center from mentoring organizations and researchers across the country. And so certainly, recognizing that beyond cultural humility, being a refugee definitely comes with its own set of experiences, its own set of traumas that are very unique, and a lot of times something that's very much not within our realm of experience. And so, and then adding language barriers, and then that sort of plays into Samantha, how to connect with parents, not just in general, but then also cultural backgrounds, also language differences, things like that. Are there any things that Audrey and Kevin that you would add as far as connecting with refugee youth, connecting with parents, with families, anything around there?
I would say if you don't know, don't try to be the answer.
Yes.
Because a lot of times, we get in situations we don't know, especially like with that population. If you know that is not your wheelhouse and you have zero knowledge or experience around it, you do better finding someone that does to help you. If you have to serve in that capacity, find someone to help you. If you do not, roundtable, pull in your people and figure out what does this look like and how do we support this youth and their family, specifically around refugee, youth, because I know we have a large population here in Indianapolis of certain, communities of people. And some people are like, well, I don't know how to work with them. Okay, ask someone that does, because there are lots of organizations here that are currently working with them that are doing great work. tap into the network, tap into those people. It can be informal. If you know them on LinkedIn, send them a message. Like sometimes we think it has to be this big grand thing. And sometimes it's as simple as, hey, I'm working with this person. I see you work at this organization. Do you have any strategies on how I can help? And you will never believe some of the responses that you'll get.
Absolutely. How do you measure, Sarah says, how do you measure mentors' core motivations in pursuing mentoring prior to them starting a match? Are there key things to look out for? And how do you navigate rejecting someone due to concern over their motivations? I see you laughing, Audrey.
It is difficult. Like, I won't sugarcoat it. It's pretty difficult. But I think I did answer in the chat a little bit ago. I'm a firm believer in more than just one interview. I think there's a lot, like, find out what your program specifically is trying to mentor towards and what your youth primarily are experiencing. So I know that there's programs that serve anybody and everybody, and that, might be, a little bit more difficult to kind of figure out, like, honing in on what exactly you're looking for. But some of the things that we look for are like open-mindedness. Are they coachable? Are they flexible with their time? Like, are, those types of things. And so we put conversation constantly around them that are going to help us kind of like figure out like if they are. And that kind of, like, some of those like conversations, going on multiple, like, have phone conversations, coffee dates with them, email them back and forth, get them into our office to do admin work, doing things that are not the glamorous stuff to see how they show up. And if that like turns them off, then they're probably going to be turned off when they get ghosted a million times. And so, and maybe a million is an exaggeration. So, but it happens, right? So kind of that's how we kind of test and kind of the water, see what people are really there for. Because we unfortunately get a lot of people that come that they just want to work with survivors, right? That right off the gate, like out of the gate, like we're like, why? Like, what's your intention of why you want to work with a survivor? Like, what do you want to see happen from that? Is it just because that's going to make you feel good? Or like, are you genuinely like, I want to do something because I learned about this issue and it's terrible and I want to do something? Like, there are two different responses there. So, and then just, the way that we have let mentors go in the past, or like before they get there, is just asking them to engage in other ways, like sharing trainings with them and just being honest with them. If we can't be honest with mentors, then we're not modeling a very, that we're very good at like being honest with the youth that we work with as well. So, again, how you do that is going to depend on the receiving person and what they respond to. But if you are feeling pretty good about not allowing them to advance in your program, then you probably have identified some of their personality or their behaviors or the characteristics that are causing you not to want to move forward with them. And so like just navigate around that. And then sometimes we offer other programs. Like, you might not like be best suited for working with a youth like with complex trauma, but like you would be an amazing after school tutor, like giving them other options. And that's where knowing what other resources and programs in your community come into handy.
And in addition to like multiple interviews, just making sure that there's potentially some like panel opportunities or them meeting different people in your staff, because you also bring biases to the table. And so someone that you think, man, this would not make a good mentor, someone else on your staff may sort of see that possibility in a different way. So, a lot of those human resources best practices also play in with sort of having mentors join your program as well. So Kimberly mentions that they're looking to diving deeper into boundaries in general with their mentors. They have mentors anywhere aged from 20s to 80s. Any thoughts or any ideas about any ways that we might expand, hey, make sure that you address this about boundaries? I know that a big thing is, how are we spending our money? What kind of like sports and activities are we doing together? Anything that either of you would sort of shout out as far as things to consider with boundaries training, either just functionally for risk and safety management, or as far as power and understanding like where this is actually coming from?
My biggest thing with boundaries is set them early and often, and don't be like afraid to like reset them. Again, like we're able to model healthy apology when we break a boundary, or, we don't set it, and we have to go back and say, like, I didn't say that you can't call me after 8 p.m. this is not me responding because like you've broken, trust or whatever, but like this is for, this is my time or what, however you want to say it. But I think setting boundaries, especially with certain youth that have had no boundaries, setting boundaries is actually like really good for them. And that actually shows that you care enough to like give them boundaries. And so as far as like trainings and resources and things like that, Monica, maybe more your wheelhouse. But that's just something that with boundaries, like when that conversation comes up, I just think it's okay to reset boundaries. And it's a good opportunity to say, you know what, like, I'm really sorry. And like modeling healthy apology, like you are a human, like you are not expected to not mess up and break a boundary, or you might break their boundary on accident, And so I think set them early, but then don't, be afraid to reset them or, have to like sit down and say, you know what, we set this boundary, but I think we can like renegotiate it. And then don't get picky about certain rules, in my opinion. Something we talk about in our trauma training a lot is not being too overly like boundaried of like, if you're driving in a car with your mentee and like you don't really like your radio up over a certain volume, but they love listening to like maybe don't pick that as the battle for, in that moment, like let them just listen to the radio. Because if you start having too many rules, then it's not fun for them either. So
well, and even programs needing to set boundaries for mentors. Like I know that in my experience, the money thing was like a pretty big deal of just saying like, why do you need to spend this much money on them? Like, why do you need to take them on a cruise? Right. And so, just sort of thinking through like, again, what are those reasons and motivations there? And how can we think through? I know that one of the ways that I would always pose it to them is we don't want the kiddos to learn to be overly reliant on us as mentors. We want to build the skills and self-reliance. It's kind of like that teach Amanda Fish thing, right? Like for them to be able to continue to be successful even without us and without our checkbook. And so what are all of those community resources? Speaking of connecting to different organizations, what are all those community resources, free resources, things that they might be able to Google or access virtually, right? How can they get to a place of engagement and resilience and happiness without having to rely on us specifically and our resources and our money and things like that. So it's really huge as far as building power and building self-efficacy. Empowerment isn't just about giving them the opportunity to choose. Empowerment is about helping them build the skills so that they make the right choices for themselves in the future, even without you there, which we don't always like to think about. For sure.
Monica,
Yeah.
I love the point you just made because these are two things I like to always, or just a little saying I like to say when thinking about mentor-mentee relationships. One thing I like to tell people to keep in mind, you either are serving two purposes. You are either helping them build the tools or you are helping them use the tools. And so you may be the person that helps them build them, but you're not the person that helps show them how to use them. Maybe that's another mentor's job. And so I think sometimes recognizing your own skill set through the training that you're getting, and then recognizing, hey, I'm a better builder than I am showing them how to use them. So let me serve in capacities as a mentor where I am doing more of like leading them to the water, showing them like, okay, let's build the cup out of the mud, and and all that stuff. So maybe that's the role that you play, and you're not necessarily the one that's helping them scoop the water and teach them how to drink it so that they don't choke, and I just use that as like a little quick way to think. We can tell our mentors that, and sometimes people will kind of digest that in a different way.
Well, and you hear that a lot with mentors who have kiddos with like really either like different career aspirations or really high career aspirations, where the mentor will say like, hey, I only have a high school degree. I failed math. Like there's nothing that I can do to help them with their degree. And it's just like, that's not really your job. It's okay. It's okay for that to not be your job. Absolutely. I know that there was a quick question, and it was kind of addressed earlier about if any of the advice shared today would be different if the mentee didn't choose, if they're court mandated to be a part of the program. I think both of you addressed that a little bit, but is there anything else that we would add to that as far as like court mandated mentoring relationships or anything there?
So one of the things that comes to mind for me specifically around that is one of our qualifications, if you will, for our mentees is that they choose to be in the relationship. However, we have also like taken on mentees that have been court ordered into our program, and that looks different. And so how, sometimes you're like, well, how can they really choose it if it's like they're being told they have to do it? But we just like to kind of say, like, regardless of like why they enter our program, just do the same things that you would do if they weren't court ordered. That might make them maybe even more apathetic or, defiant about meeting with a mentor. But if you are able to set up the expectations and, as a mentor, show up for them as a mentor. Like if you say you're going to call on Mondays at 7 p.m., just keep calling Mondays at 7, whether they answer or not, and what the court system, how the, whatever you respond back to the court or you're reporting back to the court for them, that's still their choice. Like if they were court ordered to do something and they chose not to engage, like that's on them. Unfortunately, that's how we would approach it. And then just, but when they do choose to engage, we're there, open arms, or we're going to just keep trying along the way. So I think it just goes back to just trying to stay consistent and open, and not like seeing it as like a different situation because they were court ordered versus just because they like signed up for it. Most of the people that we work with were referred to us by their case manager. So so that we have a lot of people that are not super excited to enter the mentoring relationship, but we have relationships that have been going on for over 5 years at the same time. So it works out still.
Well, I think it's also understanding the power of osmosis. Like they don't always have to be like perfectly engaged, the activity that you set before them, like, giving them that option to look disengaged, because you'd be surprised at like what they'll overhear or like how their minds and hearts may change over time, even if it's like years in the future. Like if you're just doing your own happy activity and doing your own thing next to them or in their proximity, you'd be surprised at how much sort of gets in via osmosis. And so just, again, having that confidence and having that being okay with just kind of like continuing as planned, even if their choice in that day or in that situation is not to engage, and then also not making assumptions that they're not going to engage next time. Minnie, I know that you've been looking at the chat. Is there anything that has popped up there? I know it's a little bit easier for me to check the Q&A.
For sure. And I feel like you all, the audience, has been great at responding to each other's questions too. But I did see this question brought up earlier, and I think folks did chime in, but Audrey and Kevin, feel free to chime in if you have anything else to add. Just questions around what are good ways to determine a mentor's true reason for wanting to be a mentor, as well as another question, as a METCH support specialist, how do we best coach mentors who clearly have implicit bias that needs to be checked, or savior complex intentions?
So I can take the lead on that one. Number one, I would say, what DEI work are you doing within your institution or organization? If you're not doing any, how do you expect to do it with the mentors? So if you all haven't committed to it, you can't expect the commitment from your mentors. And to me, I feel like that is the number one way. Is if you're doing the work, then that work will spill out to your policies. The work will spill out in how you match, who you recruit. It will spill out into the things that you say when you are interviewing or checking references. Like it will be threaded throughout everything that you do. So if you're not doing the work, again, you cannot expect them to have done the work or come willing to do it themselves. I also say making sure that that is forefront. If it's put it on your website, make sure that everyone that gets involved with you knows that this is an important thing for you and that you are highlighting the diversity and the equity and the inclusion of those that you're serving. And so not just using those buzzwords, but in what ways are you doing that? Like that needs to be seen and upfront on your website, so that when people go check you out to say, oh, I want to sign up, they see right there, we are expecting you to either come doing this work or having done some of this work, with these specific knowledges. Like Audrey and Monica have said it, the expectations should be set for what you want. And then they either will align with them or they'll say, hey, I want to align. What training do you have? Because I still want to do it. Or maybe this is not a good fit for me, which helps you really find out and gravitate towards more people that may be a better fit, and then figuring out how you weed through those individuals to see who really are good fits for your organization. And so for me, if you want to bring in a consultant to do DEI work, you can do that. You can start a book club, reading different articles. That can be a good way to just start doing the work on your own, and having informal spaces for conversation at your organization and even with your mentors. Maybe inviting parents so that they can, parents that are engaged maybe with the youth that you're serving, to maybe have conversation with mentors that are interested in becoming, with individuals interested in becoming mentors. So it's kind of like they're getting a crash course of what kind of parents they're working with backgrounds. All those things contribute to building up this diversity, which can help you identify the type of people that you want, who will actually adhere to dealing with their biases and even respecting diversity and making sure that they follow along with the expectations that you have set forth.
Yeah, a couple great programs that just jump to mind, who have like pretty clear diversity, equity, inclusion statements on their websites. There's one, Big Brothers Big Sisters of Kentuckiana. If you're here, great job. They have a JEDI website that has a lot of different training videos and training resources around DEI. And then also First Exposures out of San Francisco has a lot of really cool stuff that they do with their kiddos around photography and measuring DEI goals there. And so just like Kevin said, he is one of our TA providers here in Indiana. If you don't know that there is free technical assistance or no cost technical assistance offered through Mentor, please follow up with myself or with Minnie or check out the website. Because you can have a consultant walk with you about looking at your programs and looking how you might implement some of these things into your best practices, for sure. I know that we're coming to the end of our time here. There's a couple more questions. Just Stacy, pretty straightforwardly, what is this typical length of time that you feel a youth should be in a mentoring program?
I think it depends. Kevin, you're more the research guy, but I think it depends on what you're trying to accomplish with your program. And you know, for us specifically, it's actually something that I've been working with my TA consultant on. Shameless plug there for the TA, but we've been talking a lot about, like, you know, in order to, you know, like if we're signing a year friendship pact between our mentors and our mentees, but really it takes 6, 9, a whole year, like 12 months of just laying the groundwork, building trust.
Yes.
Like we can't possibly be like moving the needle on outcomes, you know, getting them to like their own self-actualization and like realization and like working on their own goals in that amount of time. And so we are kind of even just in full transparency, like we're looking at like extending that length of time, just because a year kind of is short, but also you have to realize on the flip side, like most mentors are volunteer. And so you got to look at like what your ask is for your mentors as well, and your volunteers, and what type of length of engagement you're asking for them, from them. So, you know, over a year in my opinion, but also like if you're a school-based program, that might look different versus being in the community, just, you know, school years, things like that. So Kevin, I don't know if you have more from the research standpoint.
Well, not necessarily so much from the research standpoint. I'll probably pull from, like, you know, my practitioner background. So I agree. I don't think a year is long enough. You know, having been a mentee and a mentor, it like even after the year was done, it was still a relationship. Like it never went away. Like it just never dissolved. And so for me personally, I think that you have to ask yourself, are you only concerned with the outcomes of the program and organization, or are you concerned with the outcomes that the youth themselves had? And so if you are not tailoring per, like if every youth doesn't have their own plan that, you know, and goals and things that they're trying to get to, then are you really trying to serve the youth, or are you trying to serve yourself? And I think that's a larger question that we won't get into right now, but that is a larger question that you need to ask is, are you more concerned with your program and your finances than you are with the youth that you are supposed to serve? Because as Monica mentioned earlier, we are in, you know, this realm in social services for a reason. And so you have to come back to that. Is that really your reason? I will say that, you know, just in research, so as a doctoral candidate, when I, you know, approaching research, getting ready to approach my study, relationship building is very important. So in a lot of the literature, you know, some people will mention it, but the really good literature will tell you spending time to build a relationship before you do anything is important, because it allows them to see who you are, it allows you to see who they are, and then see where you might match, you know, like what things do you all have, you know, run in the same lane with, you know what I'm saying? What things are different? What things can you leverage? What things do you need to learn? And so you can begin to see all that through your relationship building. And, you know, in terms of a researcher, you know how to maybe change your questions. So you have better questions to ask your participants, a different approach to maybe how you were going to address, like, whether the program or the study, you know what I'm saying? Like, maybe that will be influenced and changed based off the relationship. And you can learn a lot of things that will help you tailor something that is better suited to what outcomes that you really want to have versus what you think you should have.
And recognizing that surveys can be re-traumatizing.
Yes.
So absolutely. Well, I know that we're at the end of our Q&A time. Thank you again so much, Audrey and Kevin, for just the wealth of experience and the resources and just your honesty and vulnerability and transparency today. Minnie, I know that you mentioned your end survey there. It really helps us to continue to develop out these webinars in the future if you answer those. Anything that you would add before we end today's webinar?
No,
Thank you all so much. And we will definitely post the recording, the resources, the slides. You will all be able to contact Audrey, Kevin, Monica. If you have any follow-up questions, we can also send their contact information out as well. So we'll be in touch, and please reach out if you all have any questions. But thank you all for being here, and hope you all have a great rest of your day.
All right. Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.